Did you think the Middle Ages were all about chastity belts and sexual repression? Ever wonder what medieval folks actually thought about women's pleasure? Prepare to have your mind blown by these shocking medieval views on female sexuality that aren't in your history textbooks. Number 1. Mutual pleasure was sometimes required by law. Yes, you read that right. In some medieval courts, a woman could actually divorce her husband if he couldn't satisfy her sexually. Medieval marriage was complicated, but many theologians and legal scholars believed that both partners needed to experience pleasure during sex for it to be valid and proper. The medieval bestseller, The Art of Courtly Love by Andreas Capellanus, even suggested that true love could only exist outside of marriage because married sex was too focused on reproduction rather than mutual enjoyment. Medieval medical texts like those by Albertus Magnus stated clearly that women needed to experience pleasure and release their seed, similar to male ejaculation in their understanding, for conception to occur. This actually gave women some surprising sexual rights. Court records from medieval France show cases where women successfully ended marriages because their husbands couldn't perform adequately. One 15th century case from York, England, documents a woman named Joan who testified that her husband Richard was unable to know her carnally and to procreate offspring, and never could from the time of the contract of marriage between them until now. The court agreed with her and nullified the marriage. The reasoning behind this wasn't particularly feminist by modern standards. It was tied to reproduction. Medieval doctors believed that conception required both male and female orgasm. They thought women released seeds similar to men's, and both seeds needed to mix for pregnancy to occur. This medical misunderstanding actually created a culture where male lovers were expected to ensure their partner's satisfaction, at least in theory. While this doesn't mean medieval women enjoyed complete sexual freedom, it does challenge our assumptions about the era being entirely repressive toward female sexuality. Marriage manuals from the time period often included advice for men on how to properly arouse their wives. The popular medieval health guide, Secretis Mulierum, The Secrets of Women, instructed husbands to speak lovingly to their wives and engage in foreplay before intercourse to ensure mutual pleasure. Number 2. Female masturbation was sometimes prescribed as medicine. Shocking as it might sound, some medieval doctors actually prescribed masturbation to women for health reasons. Medieval medicine followed the ancient Greek theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, which needed to be in balance for good health. According to this theory, sexual frustration could cause an imbalance in women, leading to a condition called uterine fury or hysteria. The treatment. Manual stimulation, often performed by a midwife or doctor. Medical texts, like those of Avicenna, whose works were standard in European medical schools, described treatments for women suffering from retained seed that included massage of the genitals until the patient experienced pleasure and relief from symptoms. The 13th century physician, William of Saliceto, wrote detailed instructions for treating women suffering from suffocation of the womb, which today might be recognized as sexual frustration. His suggested remedy included massaging the genitals with specific oils until the patient experienced a paroxysm, orgasm, that would release the harmful buildup of female seed. This doesn't mean medieval society openly celebrated female self-pleasure, far from it. Religious authorities generally condemned masturbation as sinful. However, the medical practice existed in an awkward parallel with religious teaching, showing how medieval views on sexuality were more complex and contradictory than we might assume. Interestingly, these medical treatments weren't considered sexual in nature at the time, but purely medical. The line between medicine and sexuality was blurry by modern standards. These treatments continued well into the Victorian era. eventually leading to the invention of early vibrators as medical devices, a historical curiosity that has its roots in medieval medical practices. Number 3. The female orgasm was considered more powerful than male. Medieval medical texts often described female pleasure as more intense and powerful than male pleasure. The widely read 13th century medical encyclopedia by Albertus Magnus claimed women experience greater pleasure in the sexual act than men do, and that women's pleasure lasts longer than men's. Why did they believe this? Several reasons. First, medieval physicians noticed women could have multiple orgasms, while men needed recovery time. This led to the belief that women had stronger sexual appetites and capabilities. Albertus Magnus wrote that women are never satisfied with the embraces of one man, reflecting both a respect for female sexual capacity and an anxiety about controlling it. Second, medieval thinkers believed women's sexual organs were essentially inverted versions of men's, with all the same parts, just inside rather than outside. This anatomical theory, inherited from ancient Greek medicine, suggested women felt the same sensations as men during sex, just more intensely because their organs were considered more perfect in their internal arrangement. The 12th century text Trotula, named after a female physician from Salerno, Italy, described female genitals as wonderfully constructed for pleasure. Another text from the period states, "Nature has placed in women a great fondness for coitus, because the pleasure that women feel in intercourse is twofold. They feel it in the clitoris on the outside and in the neck of the womb on the inside." These beliefs created a fascinating contradiction in medieval thought. Women were simultaneously viewed as more spiritual and pure than men, yet also believed to harbor more intense sexual desires. This contradiction helped justify various forms of control over women's sexuality, while acknowledging their sexual nature. Medieval literature reflects this dual view. Stories often featured virtuous maidens who needed protection from their own potential desires. The 13th century, Roman de la Rose, one of the most popular medieval texts, describes women's sexual pleasure in vivid detail while simultaneously warning about the dangers of uncontrolled female sexuality. Number 4. Older women were considered more sexual than younger women. Contrary to today's youth-obsessed culture, medieval people believed women's sexual desire increased with age. This view came partly from medical theories and partly from social observations about women's changing roles throughout life. Medieval medical texts claimed that as women aged, especially after menopause, they became hotter and drier qualities associated with male physiology and heightened desire. While young maidens were thought to be cool and wet, older women were believed to develop more masculine humoral qualities, making them more sexually aggressive. The 14th century physician Bernard of Gordon wrote that women past childbearing age desire intercourse more than young girls do, because their bodies retained heat from decades of sexual activity. A popular medical text from the era stated that old women who still engage in intercourse are more desirous than young girls because of the heat and itching of their genitals. These beliefs created social anxiety about widows in particular. Church authorities worried that widows with their sexual experience and without husbands to control them might become sexually dangerous to community morals. This led to contradictory messages. Widows were pressured both to remain chaste in honor of their dead husbands and to remarry quickly to prevent them from becoming sexually disruptive. Literature from the period often portrayed older women as sexually insatiable. The character of the wife of Bath in Chaucer's Canterbury Tales is perhaps the most famous example, a multiple times widowed older woman openly discussing her sexual appetites and expertise. While presented somewhat comically, Her character represents real medieval beliefs about older women's sexuality. Interestingly, these views meant older women sometimes enjoyed more sexual freedom than their younger counterparts. Post-menopausal women couldn't get pregnant, removing one major concern about female sexuality. Older women's supposed masculine qualities made them less subject to some restrictions placed on younger women, although this came with social stigma rather than celebration. Number 5. Foreplay was considered essential, not optional. Think extended foreplay is a modern invention? Medieval marriage manuals emphasized the importance of foreplay, not just as a kindness, but as a necessary part of successful sex. Many medieval medical texts insisted that women, being colder by nature than men, needed more time to become properly aroused for successful intercourse. The 15th century, the 15 Joys of Marriage advised husbands to engage in extensive touching and kissing before attempting intercourse. Another popular marriage manual stated that a man should dally with his wife and prepare her mind for intercourse with playful words, and stir up her desire by touching her secret parts. Medieval physicians believed inadequate arousal in women not only prevented conception, but could cause physical harm. Albertus Magnus warned that if a woman wasn't properly aroused before intercourse, her womb might not open correctly to receive seed, leading to both physical discomfort and reproductive failure. Religious authorities had complicated views on this matter. While some church writers condemned any sexual activity beyond the minimum needed for reproduction, others recognized the medical theories of their time. Thomas Aquinas, one of the most influential medieval theologians, acknowledged that foreplay and sexual play between spouses was natural and not sinful if it led to procreative intercourse. In the privacy of the marriage bed, medieval couples were encouraged to engage in what one text called the fondling that excites the ardor of play. The 13th century, on the Secrets of Women, provides detailed instructions on how husbands should touch and stimulate their wives to ensure they reach the paroxysm necessary for conception. This emphasis on female arousal wasn't entirely about women's enjoyment. It was connected to reproduction. But it did create a sexual culture that, at least in theory, recognized women's need for sexual pleasure as legitimate and necessary. Number 6. Female public hair was considered extremely attractive. In an era when modern beauty standards encourage hair removal, medieval beauty standards celebrated female body hair, particularly pubic hair. Medical texts described pubic hair as a sign of health, fertility, and proper feminine development. Several medieval medical authorities claimed that abundant pubic hair indicated a woman's strong reproductive capabilities and sexual heat. The 12th century medical compendium, Causes and Cures, by Hildegard von Bingen, a remarkable female abbess and physician, described pubic hair as a sign of proper feminine development and health. Other medical texts associated lush pubic hair with fertility and sexual responsiveness. This appreciation extended to literary works as well. Medieval love poetry often praised women's secret hair as an erotic feature. In The Romance of the Rose, a wildly popular 13th century French poem, the protagonist dreams of kissing every single hair of his beloved's body. Other love poems from the era make similar references to female body hair as an attractive feature. Beauty treatments of the time sometimes focused on enhancing rather than removing body hair. While upper-class women might have removed visible facial and body hair, pubic hair was often considered an erotic asset to be maintained or even enhanced. Some beauty manuals included recipes for tonics meant to encourage thicker, more abundant pubic hair. The medieval attitude toward female body hair demonstrates how beauty standards are cultural rather than universal. What modern Western culture might consider undesirable was once considered a mark of feminine allure and reproductive health. Some medical texts even warned that removing pubic hair could lead to health problems by disrupting the body's natural balance. Number 7. Bedroom talk was considered essential for female pleasure. Medieval people believed strongly in the power of words to arouse desire, particularly for women. Medical and romance literature from the period emphasize that women needed not just physical touching but also verbal stimulation to become properly aroused. The 13th century physician Arnold of Villanova advised men to speak to their wives of the joy and pleasure of making love before and during intercourse. Another medical text instructed husbands to speak wantonly to their wives with all the foolishness and allurement they can think of, to prepare them for sex. This advice wasn't just for men. Women were sometimes encouraged to use speech to increase their own and their partner's pleasure. The medieval bestseller, The Art of Courtly Love, suggested that verbal expression was central to sexual pleasure for both partners. Some court records even mention cases where women complained their husbands wouldn't speak lovingly to them during intimate moments. Medieval love poetry provides examples of the kind of language considered arousing. These poems often featured elaborate praise of a woman's body parts, declarations of desire, and promises of pleasure. While public speech was heavily regulated, especially for women, private speech between spouses was considered an important part of marital intimacy. Religious authorities had mixed views on this practice. Some condemned any immodest speech, even between married couples, while others recognized it as part of natural marital relations. The 13th century theologian Albertus Magnus acknowledged that playful words between spouses were acceptable if they led to procreation. This medieval emphasis on verbal arousal shows a sophisticated understanding of female sexuality that recognized the connection between emotional and physical stimulation. Long before modern relationship experts emphasized communication in intimacy, medieval couples were being advised to talk their way to better sex. Did these medieval views on female pleasure actually translate into better experiences for real women of the time? Could our medieval ancestors have understood some aspects of female sexuality better than later generations did?